The chandelier shook like something fragile. Crystal light scattered across the polished ballroom floor, and the smell of champagne, cigars, and violence filled the air. The summer heat clung to every man standing inside the Marseille estate. A string quartet played softly in the corner, but no one listened. All eyes were on the couple at the center of the dance floor. Esther Campbell stood there, her hand trapped in Paolo Jacques' grip. The white silk gown she wore had been chosen by his mother. It fit perfectly now, cinched tight at her waist with a bodice that felt like armor. The veil had been lifted. Diamond pins held her dark curls in place, but not enough to hide the faint bruise along her collarbone. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stood still and tried to breathe through the cologne and the stares. "First dance for the bride and groom," the officiant announced, his voice cutting through the thick air. The guests watching shifted, champagne glasses clinking, leather holsters creaking beneath designer suits. Some leaned against marble columns, grinning. Some lit cigars and blew smoke toward the ceiling. Others just stared. They had already witnessed 3 forced marriages that year. None of the brides had fought back, not loud enough for anyone to remember. Paolo pulled her closer and placed his hand on her waist. His fingers were firm and she stiffened, but he didn't stop. "You look beautiful," he said, turning her toward the crowd. "My wife. My queen. Starting tonight." The ballroom went silent except for the music. Then from beneath the silk, a blade flashed. Esther's hand moved fast and deliberate. She pulled the concealed knife from the holster strapped to her thigh and slashed across Paolo's palm. Blood dripped onto the white marble floor. Gasps erupted. Guns clicked. But Esther's voice rang out clear and cold. "I don't do cages, Paolo Jacques. You want a queen? You'll have to survive one first." Paolo froze, staring at his bleeding hand. Then he looked at her face and something flickered in his dark eyes. Not rage. Not shock. Something closer to fascination. The room erupted. Paolo's men reached for their weapons, but before anyone could fire, 12 soldiers stepped forward from different positions in the crowd. Marcus. 10 others. Guns drawn but not pointed at Esther. Pointed at Paolo. The whole ballroom went still. Even the quartet stopped playing. Esther's breath caught in her throat as Marcus nodded at her. These were the men she'd been meeting in secret for weeks. Men tired of Paolo's iron fist. Men who wanted something different. "She walks," Marcus said, his voice steady. "And we walk with her." Paolo's jaw tightened. Blood dripped from his hand onto his expensive Italian shoes. He could have given the order. Could have painted the ballroom red. But he didn't. Instead he smiled. Told. Dangerous. Intrigued. "You want war, Esther?" His voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Then let's see if you can survive it." She stepped back, the blade still in her hand, silk gown swishing against the floor. "I already have." Then she turned her back on him and walked toward the double doors. Marcus and Diego flanked her immediately, creating a wall of loyalty between her and Paolo's remaining men. No one spoke. No one stopped her. Outside the air was cooler. The night sky stretched dark above Compton, dotted with distant lights and sirens. 3 black SUVs waited by the gate, engines already running. Marcus had planned the escape route. Esther climbed into the lead vehicle, her wedding dress spilling across the leather seats. She didn't look back at the estate, at the ballroom, at the man she'd just humiliated in front of his entire organization. Marcus climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. He didn't ask if she was sure. When he spoke, his voice was calm. "Where to, boss?" She hesitated for only a moment, feeling the weight of the blade still warm in her hand. Then she made her choice. South Compton. The warehouse district. The SUV rolled forward, tires crunching over gravel. 2 more vehicles followed close behind, headlights cutting through the darkness. They drove in convoy formation through empty streets. The sound of engines was the only thing between them. As they drove, thunder rumbled far off in the hills. Esther flinched at the sound, her hand tightening on the blade. Marcus slowed at an intersection without a word. The silence between them wasn't tense like she expected. It felt solid, almost protective. After a while he spoke again. "You know he's coming for us." "I know. You know some of us might not make it." "I know that too." Marcus nodded, eyes on the road. "Then we're ready." When they reached the warehouse, the building stood massive and abandoned beneath the glow of distant streetlights. Graffiti covered the walls. Broken windows lined the second floor. But inside the space was vast. Empty. Waiting. Esther stepped out of the SUV, her heels clicking against concrete. The other vehicles parked in a defensive formation. 12 soldiers emerged, weapons ready, eyes sharp. Marcus walked to the warehouse entrance, pushed open the heavy metal door and stood aside. "It's not much," he said. "But it's ours." She looked at him, then at the warehouse. The smell of oil and rust reached her nose, familiar in a way the estate never was. She stepped inside. The space was cold but functional. Old machinery sat dormant in corners. A second-floor catwalk offered a view of every entrance. Steel beams ran across the ceiling like ribs. Diego appeared at her side with a duffel bag. "Weapons, cash, burner phones," he said. "Everything you asked for." She unzipped the bag, seeing the tools of her new empire. Her fingers brushed against cold metal and bundled bills. "What now?" Diego asked. Esther pulled the diamond pins from her hair, letting her curls fall free. She dropped the pins on the concrete floor where they clattered and scattered. "Now we build something they can't destroy." She didn't know if this would work. Didn't know if Paolo would let her live long enough to find out. But standing there in that warehouse, surrounded by men who chose her over fear, wearing a wedding dress stained with her enemy's blood, Esther Campbell felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. And it was worth dying for. That blade beneath the wedding dress is just the beginning. Smash that like button, subscribe to see how this war unfolds, and comment where you're watching from, Team Esther or Team Paolo. Now let's see if our queen survives what comes next. The blood spread across Paolo's palm like a promise. He didn't flinch. Didn't cry out. He just stood there on the dance floor, watching the crimson drip onto the white marble between them, each drop echoing in the sudden silence. Esther kept the blade steady, her grip firm despite the tremor running through her body. Around them, 200 killers held their breath. Paolo's head of security, Victor, moved first. His hand went to his holster, face twisted with rage. "You little. Stand down." Paolo's voice cut through the tension like a second blade. Victor froze mid-draw, confusion flickering across his scarred face. Paolo's eyes never left Esther's. "I said stand down." The command rippled through the room. Fingers eased off triggers. Shoulders relaxed by millimeters. But the danger remained, coiled and waiting. Esther took one step back. Then another. The silk of her gown whispered against the floor, a sound too delicate for what she'd just done. Paolo watched her retreat, and something in his expression shifted. The fury she'd expected wasn't there. Instead she saw calculation. Interest. The look a predator gives when it finds prey that bites back. "You're making a mistake," he said softly, wrapping his bleeding hand in a white handkerchief that bloomed red. "Walking away from me. The mistake was thinking I'd stay." Marcus appeared at her right shoulder, his presence solid and protective. Diego materialized at her left. Behind them, 10 more soldiers stepped forward in perfect synchronization, forming a wall of loyalty between Esther and Paolo's remaining forces. Guns emerged from concealed holsters. Safeties clicked off. The sound was like bones breaking. Paolo's loyalists responded immediately. Weapons appeared from every corner of the ballroom. The wedding guest who'd been drinking champagne moments ago now crouched behind marble columns, hands on their own firearms. The string quartet fled through a side door. Someone's grandmother crossed herself and whispered prayers in rapid Italian. But Paolo raised his uninjured hand, palm out. A gesture of restraint. His men hesitated, caught between training and confusion. Their boss had just been attacked, humiliated, cut open in front of everyone who mattered. Protocol demanded immediate retaliation. Blood for blood. Death for disrespect. Yet Paolo stood still, studying Esther with an intensity that made her skin burn. "You've been planning this," he said. Not a question. A realization. "How long?" "Long enough." Her voice didn't shake. She'd practiced that voice in mirrors, in locked bathrooms, in stolen moments when his enforcers weren't watching. The voice of someone who wouldn't break. Marcus shifted his weight, gun trained on Victor. "We're leaving now. Anyone follows, we paint this ballroom red." Paolo's laugh was low and dangerous. He took a step forward, ignoring the dozen weapons pointed at him. Esther's breath caught. She raised the blade higher, but he didn't stop until he was close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, Smell the expensive cologne mixed with his blood. You think you can survive out there? His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her. In my city? With my enemies circling? I'll survive you. That's all that matters. Something flickered across his face then. Surprise. Respect. And beneath it all something darker. Hunger. He leaned in closer, close enough that his lips almost brushed her ear. Then run, little queen. Run fast. Because when I come for you, and I will come for you, you'll wish you'd killed me when you had the chance. The threat should have terrified her. Instead, heat flooded through her body, pooling low in her stomach. She hated that reaction, hated him for causing it. She pressed the blade against his throat, just enough to draw a thin line of blood. Try it, she breathed. See what happens. For one suspended moment, they stood locked together, blade between them, 200 witnesses holding their collective breath. Paolo's eyes burned into hers with an intensity that felt like being marked. Claimed. Then she pulled back, turned on her heel and walked toward the exit. Her soldiers moved with her in perfect formation, guns still raised, covering her retreat. The crowd parted like water, creating a corridor of terrified faces and hidden weapons. Paolo didn't move. Didn't give the order to fire. He just stood there clutching his bleeding hand, watching her walk away, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Victor appeared at his side, practically vibrating with fury. Boss, we can't let her. Let her go. But she humiliated you. I know what she did. Paolo's voice was soft, almost amused. He pressed the handkerchief tighter against his palm, feeling the sting of the cut. It would scar. Good. He wanted to remember this. And now she's made herself interesting. Interesting. Victor stared at him like he'd lost his mind. She's made herself a target. No. Paolo watched Esther disappear through the double doors, her white dress the last thing visible before the darkness swallowed her. She's made herself a challenge. There's a difference. He turned to face his remaining soldiers, all of them tense and waiting for orders. Blood still dripped from his hand onto his $1,000 shoes. His wedding, his carefully orchestrated display of power, had just exploded in his face. Half his men had betrayed him for a 19-year-old girl with more courage than sense. He should be furious. Should be screaming for their heads. Should be burning Compton to the ground to find her. Instead, Paolo Jacques smiled. Gentlemen, he said calmly, addressing the stunned ballroom. It appears my bride needs more convincing. Victor, call everyone. Tell them there's a new player in town. Tell them she's mine to deal with. He paused, looking down at his bleeding palm. And tell them anyone who touches her answers to me first. Victor's confusion deepened. Boss, I don't understand. You don't have to. Paolo walked toward the bar, leaving bloody footprints on the pristine marble. He poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and downed it in one swallow, welcoming the burn. Just know that Esther Campbell just became the most dangerous woman in Compton. And I'm going to enjoy every second of breaking her. But as he poured another drink, Paolo touched the cut on his throat where her blade had kissed his skin. His pulse jumped beneath his fingers, and he realized with dark amusement that he was more alive now than he'd felt in years. She'd declared war. Finally, something worth fighting for. Outside, Esther climbed into the SUV, her hands shaking now that adrenaline was fading. Marcus started the engine, but before he could shift into gear, Esther's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. Paolo's voice filled the car, smooth and deadly. You left your bouquet behind, wife. Should I press the flowers for you? A keepsake of our special day. How did you? I know everything about you, Esther. Where you'll run. Who you'll trust. How you think. He paused and she could hear the smile in his voice. But please keep trying. It's been so long since someone made me work for what I want. See you soon, little queen. The line went dead. Esther stared at the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. Marcus looked at her in the rearview mirror, concern etched across his face. What did he say? Esther dropped the phone on the seat and met Marcus's eyes. The fear she'd been suppressing threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it down, locked it away. She'd made her choice. There was no going back. Drive, she said. And don't stop until we're armed and ready. Because Paolo Jacques isn't coming for blood. Then what's he coming for? Esther touched her throat where his breath had been, where his whispered threat still echoed. she could still feel the heat of him, the pull of something she didn't want to name. Something worse. The warehouse smelled like rust and gasoline and possibility. Esther stood on the second-floor catwalk, watching her crew unload weapons from a stolen shipment. 12 soldiers, all moving with purpose, checking ammunition, cleaning guns, fortifying exits. 3 days since the wedding. 3 days since she'd walked away from Paolo Jacques with his blood on her blade. 3 days of building something he couldn't touch. Below, Marcus spread a map of Compton across an oil-stained table. Red circles marked Paolo's operations. Drug houses, collection points, supply routes. The infrastructure of his empire, carefully documented through weeks of secret surveillance. Esther descended the metal stairs, her boots echoing in the vast space. She traded the wedding gown for black cargo pants and a fitted tank top. No more silk cages. His shipment comes through the docks Thursday night, Marcus said, tapping the map. 20 kilos of product. $250,000 in value. Who's running security? Esther asked. Victor's crew. 8 men, maybe 10. Diego appeared from the shadows, a black rose in his hand. Real flower, preserved in resin, attached to a card. Their signature. These just came back from the printer. Esther took the rose, turning it in the dim light. Elegant. Dangerous. A message Paolo would understand. She smiled. Perfect. Leave one at every hit. I want him to know exactly who's taking his empire apart. That night they moved like ghosts through the dock district. Esther led from the front, not behind, earning respect with every step. When Victor's men arrived to collect the shipment, they found empty crates and a single black rose lying on top. By the time they radioed Paolo, Esther's crew was already hitting his collection house on Rosecrans Avenue. The pattern continued. Monday she intercepted his weapons dealer. Tuesday she shut down his gambling operation on Long Beach Boulevard. Wednesday she convinced 3 of his distributors to switch allegiance with better terms and protection they actually trusted. Each time she left the black rose. Each time she disappeared before Paolo's reinforcements arrived. By Thursday, all of Compton was talking about the girl who'd humiliated Paolo Jacques and lived to build her own kingdom. Paolo sat in his office at the Marseille estate, 7 black roses arranged on his desk like a funeral bouquet. Victor stood across from him, barely containing his rage. We've lost 30% of operations in 4 days. She's bleeding us dry. Paolo didn't respond. He picked up one of the roses, running his thumb along the preserved petals. She'd chosen black. Not red for violence, not white for surrender. Black for mourning what he'd lost, or perhaps for the death of the bride he thought he'd claimed. We need to hit back, Victor pressed. Hard. Make an example of her crew. Show Compton what happens when... No. Paolo's voice was quiet but absolute. He stood, walking to the window overlooking the estate grounds. Somewhere out there in the darkness, Esther was building something that challenged everything he'd built. And God help him, he was fascinated. She's thinking 3 moves ahead. Every hit serves a purpose. She's not just disrupting operations, she's recruiting my enemies, offering them what I wouldn't. Then what do we do? Paolo crushed the rose in his fist, feeling thorns bite through the resin. We remind her why I own this city. The phone on his desk rang. He answered, listening for 30 seconds before his expression hardened. When? Boss. I'm on my way. He hung up and grabbed his jacket. She just hit the pharmaceutical warehouse on Century Boulevard. Victor, get the crew. We're going hunting. They arrived to find the warehouse burning, flames licking the night sky orange and gold. Paolo's pharmaceutical supply, worth $500,000, going up in smoke. His men surrounded the perimeter, guns drawn, searching for targets. But Esther's crew was already gone, vanished into Compton's maze of streets and alleys. Except for one thing. Paolo walked through the smoke toward the warehouse entrance. There, spray-painted across the metal door in silver, were 5 words. You should have let me go. And beneath it, another black rose, this one pinned to the door with a knife. His knife. The one he'd worn at the wedding. She'd stolen it before leaving and now returned it buried in his property like a declaration. Something dark and possessive unfurled in Paolo's chest. Victor was calling for blood, demanding retaliation, but Paolo barely heard him. He pulled the knife from the door, reading the message again. He was taunting him. Challenging him. Proving she wasn't afraid. He'd married her thinking she'd be decoration. A transaction to secure an alliance. He'd underestimated everything about her, and now she was making him pay for that mistake in ways he'd never anticipated. But two could play this game. Paolo took out his phone and made a call. "It's me. I need information on Esther Campbell. Everything. Family, friends, weaknesses." He paused, staring at the burning warehouse. "No, don't touch them. Just watch. I want to know what she loves." Because if Esther wanted to hurt him where it mattered, he'd return the favor. Not with violence. That was too easy, too expected. No, he'd hurt her the way she was hurting him. Strategically. Intimately. He'd find what she couldn't afford to lose and dangle it in front of her until she came to him. And when she did, he'd make sure she never walked away again. Miles across Compton, Esther stood on the warehouse catwalk, watching news coverage of the pharmaceutical fire on a stolen tablet. Marcus approached, concern creasing his face. "That was our biggest hit yet. He's going to retaliate." "I know." Esther's reflection stared back at her from the dark window. He looked different now. Harder. The girl who'd been dragged to that altar was gone. In her place stood someone willing to burn the world down for freedom. "You think he'll come for us directly?" Esther thought about Paolo's eyes in the ballroom, the hunger she'd seen beneath the blood and chaos. The way his voice had sounded on the phone, promising things worse than death. She touched her throat where his breath had ghosted across her skin. "No," she said quietly. "He won't come for us. He'll come for me." And despite everything, despite the war and the violence and the very rational fear, part of her wanted him to try. Part of her needed to prove she could stand against him again and win. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her pulse jumped as she answered. "Impressive fire, little queen." Paolo's voice was silk over steel. "But you made a mistake tonight." "Really? Looks like $500,000 in losses from where I'm standing." The mistake was thinking this is about money. She could hear the smile in his voice, dangerous and promising. "You wanted my attention, Esther. Congratulations. You have it. All of it. And now I'm going to show you exactly what that means." The line went dead. Esther stared at the phone, her heart pounding against her ribs. Marcus was asking questions, but she couldn't hear him over the roar of blood in her ears. Paolo was done playing defense. Whatever came next would be different, personal, and she had no idea if she was ready for it. But ready or not, the real war was about to begin. The fog rolled thick off the harbor, turning the docks into something ghostly. Esther crouched behind a shipping container, watching Paolo's weapons dealer check his watch for the third time. To aim. The witching hour. Her crew was positioned around the perimeter. Marcus on the north side, Diego covering the exit route, 10 others hidden in the shadows with weapons ready. This shipment would hurt Paolo where he'd feel it. Military-grade firearms meant for his expansion into Long Beach territory. Without them, he'd lose the war he'd been planning for months. Esther signaled Marcus. "Move in." But before her team could advance, headlights cut through the fog. Not the dealer's truck. Black SUVs, 3 of them moving in perfect formation. Esther's stomach dropped as the vehicles stopped and doors opened. Paolo stepped out first, dressed in all black, a gun already in his hand. Victor and 20 soldiers followed, spreading out with tactical precision. Someone had betrayed her. Paolo's eyes scanned the dock until they found her. Even through the fog and darkness, even with 50 yards between them, she felt the impact of his gaze like a physical touch. He smiled, slow and dangerous, and raised his voice to carry across the water. "Come out, little queen. Let's talk about theft." Esther stood, her own gun steady in her grip. Her crew emerged from hiding, creating a standoff that crackled with violence. 40 men, 2 leaders, and enough firepower to paint the dock red. "Funny," she called back. "I was going to say the same thing about forced marriages." Paolo walked forward, closing the distance between them. His men moved with him, a wall of loyalty and death. Esther's crew matched the advance, step for step, until the 2 groups stood 20 feet apart. The weapons dealer had disappeared into the fog, smart enough to abandon the deal. "You've been busy," Paolo said, his voice carrying that same dark amusement from the wedding. 7 operations in 6 days. Impressive. But tonight you got sloppy. "Did I?" Esther kept her gun aimed at his chest. "Or did I want you here?" Something flickered in his expression. Uncertainty. Interest. "Why would you want that?" Because I'm tired of leaving roses. She took a step forward, closing the gap another foot. I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you that I'm not stopping. Not until you understand that I'll never be yours. You already are mine. Paolo's gun didn't waver. You became mine the moment you said those vows. The moment you cut me and walked away. You just haven't accepted it yet. Then pull the trigger and end it. The challenge hung between them, daring him to follow through. Around them, 40 men held their breath. Fingers tightened on triggers. Safeties clicked off. One wrong move would turn the dock into a massacre. But Paolo lowered his gun. No. Why not? Esther demanded, frustration bleeding into her voice. Because you know the moment you do, your empire burns? Because half your men would follow me even in death. Because killing you would be a waste. He holstered his weapon, the movement slow and deliberate. And I don't waste things I want. The admission hit her like a blow. Before she could process it, Paolo moved. Fast. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides, batting her gun aside and grabbing her wrist. Esther reacted on instinct, driving her knee toward his ribs. He blocked and spun her around, arm wrapping around her throat from behind. Stand down. Marcus shouted, gun aimed at Paolo's head. Nobody moves. Victor's command echoed across the dock. But Paolo's attention was entirely on the woman in his arms. He could feel her pulse racing against his forearm, feel the tension in her body ready to fight. His breath was hot against her ear. You want to know why I didn't kill you? Because you're the first person in 10 years who's made me feel anything other than boredom. Esther threw her head back, connecting with his nose. Paolo grunted but didn't let go. Instead, he tightened his grip, dragging her backward toward his SUV. Esther twisted, slamming her elbow into his ribs. This time his hold loosened enough for her to spin and face him. Her fist connected with his jaw. His blood, still healing from the wedding cut, split open. Paolo's eyes went dark with something between fury and desire. He grabbed her striking arm, yanking her forward, and suddenly they were chest to chest, breathing hard, staring at each other with mutual hatred and something far more dangerous. You want to fight? He growled. Fine. Let's fight. He released her and stepped back, raising his fists. Esther didn't hesitate. She came at him hard, a combination of strikes she'd learned from Marcus. Paolo blocked most, took a few and returned them with precision that spoke of years of training. They moved across the dock like dancers, violent and synchronized, each landing blows that should have ended the fight but only seemed to fuel it. Esther's lips split. Paolo's eye would bruise. Her knuckles bled. His ribs cracked. And through it all, neither called for backup. Neither wanted their crews to interfere with whatever this was becoming. Paolo caught her next punch and used the momentum to slam her against a shipping container. The metal rang with impact. Esther gasped, winded, and found Paolo pressed against her, his hand beside her head, caging her in. They were both breathing hard, both bleeding, both staring at each other with an intensity that had nothing to do with fighting. I hate you, Esther breathed. I know. Paolo's thumb brushed across her split lip, collecting blood. But that's not all you feel, is it? Before she could deny it, before she could push him away, his mouth crashed into hers. The kiss was brutal, tasting of blood and violence and something electric that shot through Esther's body like lightning. She should have bitten him, should have kneed him where it would hurt most. Instead she kissed him back. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed at her to stop. Paolo groaned against her mouth, deepening the kiss, one hand sliding into her hair while the other gripped her hip hard enough to bruise. The world narrowed to this. His taste, his heat, the dangerous pull between them that neither could deny anymore. Someone coughed. Marcus's voice cut through the fog. Boss, we should go. Reality crashed back. Esther shoved Paolo away, wiping blood from her mouth, her eyes wild. Paolo stumbled back, looking equally shaken. For a moment neither spoke. Then Esther raised her gun again, aiming at his heart with a hand that trembled slightly. Next time I see you I won't hesitate. Paolo's laugh was rough. Yes you will. Just like I did tonight. He touched his bleeding lip, then his split eyebrow as if cataloging the damage she'd done. We both will. Because whatever this is, little queen, it's not over. Not even close. He turned and walked back to his crew, Victor immediately demanding explanations. But Paolo didn't answer. He climbed into his SUV, eyes locked on Esther until the door closed between them. Esther stood frozen as Paolo's convoy disappeared into the fog. Her lips still burned. Her heart still raced. And she could still feel the imprint of his hands on her body like a brand. Marcus appeared at her side, concern etched deep. What the hell just happened? Esther touched her mouth, tasting their mixed blood. She didn't have an answer. Couldn't explain why she'd kissed the man she swore to destroy. Couldn't explain the ache low in her stomach that had nothing to do with the fight and everything to do with wanting more. Get the crew out, she said hoarsely. Now. As they retreated to the warehouse, Esther's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You taste like freedom and fury. I'm addicted already. Sleep well, wife. She deleted the message but couldn't delete the memory. Or the terrible, thrilling knowledge that the next time they met she might not walk away at all. The text came at 11:43. Unknown number. 3 words, Rosecrans house. Tonight. Esther grabbed her gun and was moving before Marcus could ask questions. The safe house on Rosecrans was where they kept the books, the money, the evidence of every operation they'd built. If Paolo found it, everything burned. She drove alone, breaking every traffic law, her mind racing faster than the engine. 3 blocks out, she killed the headlights and coasted to the curb. The house looked quiet. Too quiet. No movement in the windows. No cars on the street except one. A black sedan she didn't recognize parked in the shadows. Esther approached from the back, gun drawn, every nerve screaming. The door hung open, splintered at the lock. She slipped inside, sweeping corners, ready for ambush. The living room was destroyed. Furniture overturned. Bullet holes in the walls. And 4 bodies sprawled across the floor, men she didn't know wearing gang colors that didn't belong to Paolo. Her heart hammered. Someone had hit the house before she arrived. You're late. Esther spun, gun aimed at Paolo's chest. He stood in the kitchen doorway, blood spattered across his white shirt, his own weapon hanging loose at his side. He looked exhausted. Dangerous. Unbearably real in the dim light. What the hell are you doing here? She demanded. Saving your operation. He nodded toward the bodies. The Flores cartel. They were waiting for you. Had orders to take you alive and burn everything else. Why would you? Because no one touches you but me. The possessiveness in his voice made her pulse jump. He holstered his gun and leaned against the counter, wincing slightly. Blood seeped through his shirt at the shoulder. He'd been shot. Esther should have left. Should have called her crew and disappeared before this became something she couldn't control. Instead she lowered her gun. You're bleeding. I've had worse. That's not an answer. Paolo's laugh was bitter. You want honesty, little queen? Fine. I've had worse because I've lived in a cage my whole life. Built by my father, reinforced by every man who thought power meant control. He met her eyes and the intensity there stole her breath. Then you put a knife to my throat and walked away, and for the first time in 10 years I felt the bars break. The confession hung between them, raw and dangerous. Esther moved closer without meaning to, drawn by something she didn't want to name. Is that why you're protecting me? Because I made you feel free. I'm protecting you because the alternative is unthinkable. His voice dropped lower, intimate in the darkness. And because every time I close my eyes I taste your blood on my lips and want more. The memory of the doc crashed over her. His mouth on hers, violent and perfect and wrong in every right way. Esther's breath caught. She was standing too close now, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to smell gunpowder and expensive cologne in him. This can't happen, she whispered. I know. But Paolo's hand rose anyway, fingers barely grazing her jaw. The touch was gentle compared to their fight, almost reverent. Tell me to leave. She should. God, she should. But the words wouldn't come. Instead she found herself leaning into his palm, her eyes closing for just a moment, savoring the warmth of skin against skin without violence between them. Paolo's thumb brushed across her lips, the same lips he'd kissed with fury and hunger. Esther. Her phone shattered the moment. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. Reality crashed back. Esther jerked away, answering with a voice that almost sounded steady. What? 3 cars just left Paolo's estate. Heading your direction. You need to move now. She met Paolo's eyes. He'd heard. His expression shifted, hardening back into the dangerous man who ruled Compton through fear. Victor, he said quietly. He's coming for both of us. Then we have a problem. No. Paolo grabbed his gun, checking the magazine with practiced ease. We have a choice. Run separately and let him pick us off or what? His smile was dark, promising violence and something more. Or we fight together. Just this once. Esther heard engines in the distance getting closer. Every instinct screamed to run, to put distance between herself and the man who made her feel too much. But survival mattered more than fear. She raised her gun, standing beside him instead of against him. Just this once. Outside, headlights cut through the darkness. Victor's voice boomed across the quiet street. Come out, both of you. This ends tonight. Paolo glanced at her, something fierce and possessive burning in his eyes. Ready, little queen? Esther checked her ammunition, her heart pounding with adrenaline and something far more dangerous. Let's show them what happens when they hunt us. The door exploded inward. And together they opened fire. The Crimson Lounge was neutral territory. Had been for 5 years. A place where criminals drank without bloodshed, where wars paused at the door. Esther walked in at midnight with Marcus and Diego flanking her, needing a drink after 3 days of constant movement. Victor's attack had failed, but barely. She'd lost 2 men. Paolo had vanished after the firefight without a word. She ordered whiskey neat and tried not to think about fighting beside him. About how perfectly they'd moved together, covering angles without speaking, trusting instincts they shouldn't have shared. Then Paolo walked through the door. Their eyes met across the crowded club. The air changed instantly, crackling with tension. His crew filed in behind him. Victor, mercifully absent, probably still recovering. Paolo's jaw was bruised where she'd hit him days ago. The cut on his lip had scabbed over. He looked dangerous and beautiful and wrong in every way that made her body respond. He walked straight to the bar, deliberately taking the seat beside her. Close enough that his arm brushed hers. Fancy meeting you here, wife. Don't call me that. Esther's grip tightened on her glass. Why not? It's legal. Binding. His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the noise around them. Consummated in violence if not in bed. Heat flooded through her. You have 3 seconds to move before I make you. Make me then. Paolo turned to face her fully, his knee pressing against her thigh. I'm tired of this dance where we pretend we're not circling each other like enemies. She met his challenge with fire. That's what we are. No. His hand moved to her wrist, thumb finding her racing pulse. Enemies don't fight together. Don't save each other. Don't. Marcus's warning shout cut through the moment. Boss, we got company. Esther turned to see Santos Guerrero pushing through the crowd with 8 armed men. The Guerrero cartel, rivals to both her operation and Paolo's, always looking for weakness to exploit. Santos grinned, showing gold teeth, his eyes calculating the math of finding both leaders in one place. Well, Santos called out. The bride and groom. Together. How touching. He signaled his men to spread out, blocking exits. Looks like I get to solve 2 problems tonight. Esther's hand went to her concealed weapon. Beside her, Paolo moved with liquid grace, positioning himself between her and the primary threat. The gesture was protective, instinctive, and completely unnecessary. You really want to break neutral ground? Paolo asked, his voice deadly calm. For both your heads. Absolutely. Santos raised his gun. Everything happened at once. Esther drew and fired, taking down the man to Santos's left. Paolo's shot echoed hers, dropping the one on the right. The club erupted into chaos. Civilians screaming, diving for cover, bottles shattering. Guerrero's men opened fire. Paolo grabbed Esther's arm, pulling her behind the bar as bullets tore through bottles above their heads. North exit, he said, reloading with practiced efficiency. West is closer, she countered, doing the same. West is where they want us to run. Esther met his eyes. He was right. He hated that he was right. Fine. On 3. They moved as one. Paolo laid down covering fire while Esther sprinted for better position. She returned the favor, her shots precise and lethal, giving him room to advance. They flowed around each other like water, like they'd trained together for years instead of trying to kill each other for weeks. A Guerrero soldier came at Paolo from his blind spot. Esther's bullet found the man's chest before Paolo even turned. He glanced back at her, something fierce and grateful blazing in his expression. Then he was moving again, taking down 2 more threats with brutal efficiency. Marcus and Diego joined the fight, along with Paulo's crew. The combined force was overwhelming. Within minutes, Guerrero's men were either dead or fleeing. Santos himself lay bleeding near the overturned pool table, clutching his stomach. The Crimson Lounge was destroyed. Bodies sprawled across shattered glass. Smoke hung thick in the air. And in the center of the carnage, Esther and Paulo stood back to back, breathing hard, weapons still raised. "You saved my life," Paulo said, not turning around. "Don't make it mean something." Too late. He spun to face her, closing the distance until they were chest to chest, both covered in blood and gunpowder. "It meant something the moment you didn't let him shoot me. I was protecting my investment," she threw his words back at him. "Liar." His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her jaw. "You feel this too? This, whatever this is." Esther should have pushed him away. Should have walked out while her crew provided cover. Instead, she fisted her hands in his blood-stained shirt and yanked him down. Their mouths crashed together, angry and desperate and real. Paulo groaned, deepening the kiss, tasting her fury and her fire. His tongue swept against hers, claiming, demanding everything she wouldn't give with words. She bit his already split lip. He tightened his grip in her hair, the slight pain making her gasp. The kiss was violence transformed, all their hatred and hunger bleeding together until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Marcus cleared his throat loudly. "Boss, cops are coming." Esther shoved Paulo away, her chest heaving. His eyes were dark, pupils blown, lips swollen and bleeding fresh. They stared at each other, both knowing they'd crossed a line neither could uncross. "This doesn't change anything," she said, voice rough. Paulo's smile was dangerous. "Keep telling yourself that, little queen." He turned and walked toward the exit, his crew falling in behind him. But at the door he looked back. The promise in his eyes made her shiver. Esther touched her lips, tasting their mixed blood again. Her phone buzzed. A text from Paulo: "Next time I won't let you walk away." She deleted it. But standing in the wreckage of the neutral ground they'd burned together, she wondered if either of them could walk away anymore. The call came at dawn. Diego's voice shook, something Esther had never heard before. "Marcus is down. They ambushed us at the Century Boulevard checkpoint. Boss, he didn't make it." The phone slipped from Esther's fingers. She stood frozen in the warehouse, watching the sunrise paint the walls orange and gold, and felt nothing. Numbness spread through her chest like frost. Marcus. The first man who'd believed in her. Who'd stood at her side when she cut Paulo and walked away. Who'd called her boss and meant it with respect, not mockery. Gone. She picked up the phone with trembling hands. "Who?" "Victor's crew. They were waiting for us like they knew the route." Esther's grief crystallized into something cold and sharp. "Get everyone to the warehouse. Now." 2 hours later she stood before her assembled crew, 10 soldiers, now 9, and saw her own rage reflected in their faces. "We hit Paulo where he lives. His estate. His family. I want him to feel this." Diego hesitated. "Boss, that's war." Her voice was ice. "He wants to take what's mine? Fine. Let's see how he handles loss." They moved that night. Esther led the assault on Paulo's cousin's club in Long Beach, the one family member Paulo actually gave a damn about. Antonio Jacques, 32, charming, ran the West Side operations. The firefight was brutal and quick. When it ended, Antonio lay bleeding on his own dance floor, Paulo's name on his dying lips. Esther stood over him, gun still smoking, and felt nothing. No satisfaction. No victory. Just the same hollow emptiness that had consumed her since Marcus fell. She left a black rose on Antonio's chest and walked out into the night. Paulo got the call at 2 a.m. Victor's voice was careful, knowing how close Paulo had been to his cousin. "Sir, there's been an incident." Antonio's club. It was Esther Campbell's crew. Antonio didn't survive. The phone cracked in Paulo's grip. He said nothing for a long moment, just stood in his office staring at the 7 black roses still arranged on his desk. Antonio, who'd taught him to drive. Who'd covered for him when his father's rage turned violent. Who'd believed Paulo could be different, better than the empire demanded. Gone. Where is she? Paolo's voice was flat. We don't know. But sir, if you want me to. No. Paolo ended the call. He poured whiskey with steady hands, downed it, poured another. The alcohol burned but couldn't touch the cold spreading through his chest. He'd started this. He'd pushed and pursued and played games with a woman who matched him move for move, violence for violence. And now they were both drowning in blood. Paolo walked to the window overlooking the estate grounds. Somewhere in Compton's darkness, Esther was probably standing at her own window, feeling the same hollow victory. They'd wanted to hurt each other and they'd succeeded. But the cost was devastating. His phone sat on the desk, screen dark. He could call her. Could end this before more people died for their pride. One conversation, one truce, and the bleeding would stop. His hand reached for it. Hesitated. Drew back. Because calling her meant admitting defeat. Meant admitting that what they felt was stronger than revenge, more important than empire. And Paolo Jacques didn't surrender. Not to enemies. Not to desire. Not even when the alternative was watching his world burn. He poured another drink instead. Miles away, Esther stood on the warehouse catwalk, staring at her own phone. Marcus's last text was still there, sent hours before he died. Be safe, boss. We got your back. She could call Paolo. Could tell him that this had gone too far, that Marcus and Antonio were prices neither should have paid. One conversation, one moment of honesty, and maybe they could find another way. Her finger hovered over his contact, saved simply as husband, a cruel joke that felt less funny now. But calling him meant admitting she cared. Meant admitting that his pain mattered as much as her own. That somewhere between the violence and the kisses and the fighting side by side, he'd become more than an enemy. Esther deleted his contact instead. Diego found her at sunrise, still standing vigil. What now? He asked quietly. She turned to face him and Diego took a step back at what he saw in her eyes. Not grief anymore. Something colder. Harder. More dangerous. How we finish this, Esther said. One way or another. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number she knew too well. I lost someone too. Does it feel like winning yet? Esther's hand shook. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on the truth. No. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, then why are we still fighting? He stared at the question, knowing the answer and hating it. They were fighting because stopping meant facing what they'd become to each other. Meant admitting that somewhere in the blood and chaos, they'd stopped being enemies and become something far more terrifying. Esther didn't respond. Instead, she gathered her crew and began planning the next attack. Because forward momentum was easier than standing still. Because violence was familiar and whatever Paolo offered wasn't. But as she outlined the operation, her phone buzzed again. Meet me. Alone. 1 hour. The place where you cut me. Let's end this. Her heart hammered. It was a trap. Had to be. Paolo Jacques didn't do truces or mercy or honest conversations. He did power plays and manipulation and control. Yet something in those words felt different. Desperate. Esther looked at her crew, 8 faces waiting for orders, ready to follow her into whatever hell she chose. He thought about Marcus. About Antonio. About all the blood already spilled and all the blood still to come. Then she made her decision. Change of plans, she said. I'm going out. Alone. Diego's protest was immediate. Boss, that's suicide. Maybe. Esther grabbed her gun and jacket. Or maybe it's the only way either of us survives this. She left before anyone could stop her, driving toward the Marseille estate with her heart in her throat, wondering if she was about to end the war or walk straight into her own execution. The ballroom doors waited and somewhere inside so did Paolo. Esther was 3 blocks from the Marseille estate when her phone rang. Diego, breathless and urgent. Boss, turn around. No. You need to see this. I'm in the middle of. Carlos is dead. But before he went, he got us something. Something big. Esther's informant. The one who'd been watching Paolo's inner circle for weeks. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. I'm coming. She found Diego in the warehouse, standing over Carlos's body with a USB drive clutched in his bloody palm. The man had dragged himself 6 blocks with a bullet in his spine just to deliver it. Esther's chest constricted as she pried the drive from his cold fingers. He kept saying one name, Diego said quietly. Santiago. Paolo's underboss. His most trusted advisor. The man who'd been at his side for 15 years. Esther plugged the drive into her laptop and the files that loaded made her blood run cold. Bank transfers. Encrypted communications. Payment records. Santiago had been funding the Guerrero cartel, paying Victor to escalate conflicts, orchestrating hits on both sides designed to look like retaliation. Every attack that had pushed her and Paolo closer to mutual destruction had Santiago's fingerprints all over it. Including the ambush that killed Marcus. Esther's vision blurred red. She scrolled through more files, seeing the depth of the betrayal. Santiago had been systematically dismantling Paolo's empire while positioning himself to take over once Paolo fell. The attacks on Esther's crew weren't Paolo's orders. They were Santiago's, designed to provoke exactly the kind of war that would leave both leaders dead or weak enough to eliminate. "That son of a bitch," Diego breathed, reading over her shoulder. "He played us all." Esther sat back, mind racing. Paolo didn't know. Couldn't know, or Santiago would already be dead. Right now, Paolo thought she'd killed his cousin out of revenge. Thought she was the enemy tearing his world apart. He had no idea the real threat was standing right beside him. She checked her phone. The text from Paolo still glowed on the screen. "Meet me. Alone. The place where you cut me. Let's end this." He wanted to end the war. Probably wanted to end her. And he'd walk into that ballroom with Santiago at his back, never knowing the knife was aimed at his spine. Diego watched her face carefully. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Paolo Jacques is about to get executed by his own underboss, and we're the only ones who know." "Good." Diego's voice was hard. "Let them kill each other. We stay out of it and pick up the pieces." It was the smart play. The safe play. Let her enemy burn and watch Santiago tear apart Paolo's empire from the inside. She'd be free. Victorious. Everything she'd wanted since she walked away from that altar. Esther stared at the evidence on her screen. Saw Marcus's name in Santiago's hit orders. Saw Antonio's. Saw a dozen other deaths orchestrated by a man who'd convinced everyone he was loyal while poisoning them all. She thought about Paolo fighting beside her at the safe house, taking a bullet meant for her. About the honest conversation they'd almost had before Victor attacked. About the grief in his text that mirrored her own. They were enemies, yes. But they were honest enemies. Santiago was something worse. A traitor who killed with a smile. "Boss." Diego pressed. "What do we do?" Esther closed the laptop and stood, decision crystallizing into something clear and terrifying. "We warn him." "What? Are you insane?" "He's the enemy. Santiago is the enemy." She grabbed her jacket and gun. "Paolo's just the man I'm at war with. There's a difference. This is a mistake." "Probably." Esther headed for the door, knowing she was about to walk into the Marseille estate. Paolo's territory surrounded by his soldiers, to save the life of the man who'd tried to cage her. The irony wasn't lost. But letting Santiago win feels worse. She drove back toward the estate, adrenaline and fear warring in her chest. This could be a trap within a trap. Santiago could be waiting with Paolo, ready to eliminate them both. She could be about to die for a man who'd still put a bullet in her afterward. But as Esther pulled up to the estate gates, she thought about the way Paolo had looked at her in that burning club. The way they'd moved together, synchronized and lethal. The way his voice had sounded asking why they were still fighting. Maybe some enemies were worth saving. The ballroom doors opened and Paolo stood there alone, surprise flickering across his face at seeing her arrive armed and urgent instead of ready for their meeting. "We need to talk," Esther said, stepping inside. "And you need to see this. Before Santiago gets here." Paolo's expression shifted, reading the fear in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Esther pulled out the USB drive, still warm from Carlos's dead hand. "I'm talking about the man who's been trying to kill us both." Paolo stared at the USB drive in Esther's hand like it might explode. "Not here," he said, glancing toward the hallway where his men waited. "Where Santiago would arrive any moment. Somewhere neutral." "Devil's Cross," Esther said. 20 minutes. The abandoned church sat on the border between territories, stained glass windows shattered, pews rotting beneath a ceiling open to the stars. Esther arrived first, gun drawn, checking corners out of habit. Paolo's headlights cut through the darkness moments later. He came alone just as she had, both of them trusting and foolish in equal measure. He walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing off crumbling stone. In the dim light filtering through broken windows, he looked exhausted. Haunted. Nothing like the composed crime lord who'd smiled at her across a ballroom. "This better be real," Paolo said. Esther handed him her laptop, the files already open. "See for yourself." She watched his face as he read, saw the exact moment comprehension hit. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the laptop until his knuckles went white. He scrolled through bank transfers, communications, payment records. 15 years of loyalty revealed as 15 years of calculated betrayal. "Santiago ordered the hit on Antonio," she said quietly. "Made it look like my retaliation. He wanted you to blame me." Paolo's breathing turned ragged. "Marcus." "Same. Santiago paid Victor to ambush us, then convinced you I'd escalated." Esther moved closer, drawn by the raw pain etched across his features. "He's been orchestrating this whole war. Every attack. Every death. All of it designed to destroy us both." "Why?" Paolo's voice cracked. 15 years. He was like a brother. Because brothers don't inherit empires. And that's what he wanted, your throne built on our graves. Paolo closed the laptop with shaking hands. He walked to the altar, bracing himself against rotting wood, and for a moment she thought he might break something. Instead he just stood there, shoulders rigid, breathing through what had to be devastating betrayal. "You could have let it happen," he said finally, not turning around. "Let Santiago kill me. Take over what's left. Why warn me?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Esther could have lied. Should have lied. Instead the truth came out raw and honest. "Because I'd rather fight you than lose you to a snake." Paolo turned slowly, his dark eyes finding hers across the broken church. "Why?" "Because you're honest." The words came easier now, like a confession she'd been holding back for weeks. "You've tried to cage me, control me, break me, but you've done it to my face. You don't poison from the shadows. You don't pretend loyalty while planning murder." He took a step closer. "Santiago's betrayal disgusts me. But you just make me furious. And that I can respect." Something shifted in Paolo's expression. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, stopping close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, see the exhaustion and grief and something else burning there. "The war was never about hatred," he said softly. "Was it?" "No." Esther's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I think we both knew that after the first kiss." "Then what was it about?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Fear. Because hating you was easier than admitting what I actually feel." Paolo's hand rose to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "And what do you feel, little queen?" Before she could answer, headlights flooded through the broken windows. Multiple vehicles, engines cutting, doors slamming. Esther's blood turned to ice as she recognized the voice calling from outside. "Paolo." "Sir. I know you're both in there." Santiago's voice was smooth, amused. "Thank you for making this so convenient. 2 birds, 1 church." Paolo's gun was out instantly, positioning himself between Esther and the entrance. She moved to his side, weapon raised, heart hammering. Through the shattered windows she counted at least 15 shadows surrounding the church. "He knew," she breathed. "He knew I'd find the evidence." "Of course I knew," Santiago called out. "Carlos was my informant, darling. I let him live long enough to deliver that drive. Knew it would bring you running to save your precious enemy." His laugh echoed off stone. "So predictable. Both of you." Paolo's jaw clenched. "Any brilliant plans?" Esther scanned their surroundings. 1 entrance, broken windows too small to escape through, no cover except rotting pews. They were trapped. Just 1. "We fight together." "Together." Paolo's smile was grim. "I like the sound of that." Their hands found each other in the darkness, fingers intertwining for just a moment. A promise. An alliance. Something that felt dangerously close to more. Outside, Santiago's men moved closer. Inside, Esther and Paolo stood side by side in a broken church, finally honest about what they were fighting for. Each other. The first explosion ripped through Devil's Cross before Santiago finished gloating. Stone and fire erupted from the rear wall, creating an opening where none existed. Through the smoke, Marcus's second-in-command emerged with Diego and 8 soldiers, guns blazing. "Thought you might need backup, boss," Diego shouted over gunfire. Paulo's crew materialized from the opposite side, Victor leading the charge. For once, the scarred enforcer wasn't aiming at Esther. Santiago's men scattered under the combined assault, caught between forces they'd thought divided. Santiago himself fled toward waiting vehicles. Paulo and Esther moved as one, chasing him through the graveyard behind the church. Bullets tore through ancient headstones. Santiago turned, firing wildly, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. "You'll destroy each other eventually," he screamed. "This changes nothing." Esther's shot took him in the shoulder. Paulo's second shot dropped him to his knees. They stood over Santiago together, weapons trained on the man who'd orchestrated so much death. "It changes everything," Paulo said quietly. Then to Esther, "Your call." She could have made it hurt. Should have made it hurt for Marcus, for Antonio, for every life Santiago had stolen. Instead she pulled the trigger once, clean and final. Santiago fell forward into the dirt, and the war he'd manufactured died with him. The battle ended within minutes. Santiago's remaining men surrendered or fled. Esther stood among the wreckage, Paulo at her side, both breathing hard and alive. "Your crew saved us," Paulo said, something like wonder in his voice. "So did yours." Esther met his eyes. "Maybe we're stronger together than apart." Paulo's hand extended between them, palm up. "An offering. An alliance. Partners." She looked at his hand, scarred from her wedding blade, then at his face, bruised and exhausted and honest. "Equals," she corrected. "Equals," he agreed. Esther took his hand, and the touch felt like sealing something far more binding than any forced vows. 3 weeks later, the same ballroom that had witnessed her rebellion witnessed something different. Esther wore black this time, her choice, her dress. Paulo stood waiting in matching black, no restraints, no tricks. Just a man looking at a woman he'd tried to cage and failed spectacularly. "I do," she said, meaning it. "I do," he answered, knowing what it cost her. When they kissed, it tasted like freedom and fire and the beginning of something terrifying and perfect. The guests, their combined crews united now, erupted in applause. That night, ruling from the same warehouse where she'd planned his destruction, Esther and Paulo remade Compton's underworld. 2 thrones placed side by side. 2 crowns equal in weight. Built not on submission but on respect earned through blood and honesty and refusing to break. Paulo pulled her close in the darkness, his lips against her ear. "Still hate me, little queen?" Esther's smile was dangerous and true. "Every single day. And I wouldn't have it any other way." Their empire rose from the ashes of war, fierce, loyal, and bound by love that had survived everything designed to kill it. From enemies to equals, rulers of an empire built on blood and fire. If this story had you hooked, hit subscribe. My next dark romance is dropping soon and it's even more intense. Drop a comment with your favorite moment, then click that next video. You won't want to miss it. See you there.